Over time, human biological hardware degrades. Yet, if we look at aging populations, we see a contradiction. A significant portion of individuals maintain high functional output, cognitive sharpness, and emotional stability well into their later decades. Clinical gerontology treats aging as a process of active systemic entropy, shifting the focus from the calendar to the biological rate of decay. This infographic maps out the complete systems biology of aging, dividing it into two distinct halves. On the left side, we have the deterministic decay of biological drivers. On the right side, we see the deployment of psychosocial and clinical adaptation. Biological decay operates through a combination of hard-coded cellular clocks and random accumulating damage loops. The adaptation side counters this decay. It acts as a continuous behavioral algorithm, assessing deficits and reallocating finite resources to bypass biological roadblocks. Mapping this system means tracing a continuous chain of events, starting at microscopic DNA deterioration, tracking the resulting systemic inflammation, and observing how human psychology adjusts to those internal changes. Approaching aging through this dual system model frames it as a complex management problem. Extending human function requires integrating molecular facts with psychosocial frameworks. The absolute foundation of biological aging in the human body is established at the exact moment of cellular replication. At the end of every chromosome are protective caps of DNA called telomeres, which safeguard genetic data during division. The mechanical flaw in this system is one of attrition. With every replication cycle, the process fails to copy the very end of the DNA strand, causing the telomeres to physically shorten. Focusing on the telomere clock section of the diagram, we see this mechanism represented. This attrition creates a hard-coded biological threshold known as the Hayflick limit. Once the Hayflick limit is reached and the telomere is depleted, the cell can no longer divide without risking genetic corruption. To protect the host organism, the cell enters a state of senescence. It permanently halts replication, yet remains metabolically active, refusing to undergo apoptosis or programmed cell death. Cellular exhaustion, therefore, is a deterministic, programmed biological clock. It sets an absolute baseline limit on tissue regeneration. Beyond programmed clocks, the body must also endure stochastic or random biological damage. Much of this damage is an unavoidable byproduct of human metabolism. Moving to the factory graphic on the left side of the chart, we look at mitochondria, the primary engines of cellular energy. As they generate power, they release toxic exhaust known as reactive oxygen species, or ROS. This initiates a destructive feedback loop. ROS damages mitochondrial DNA, which reduces the efficiency of energy production, which in turn causes even more ROS to leak into the cell. As localized cellular damage mounts and senescent cells accumulate in tissue, they emit chemical signals that trigger a constant, body-wide immune response. This creates inflammaging, a state of chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation marked by elevated IL-6 and C-reactive protein markers in the blood. This clipboard table maps out how systemic inflammation disrupts the body's endocrinological balance, translating cellular damage into visible clinical changes. Growth hormone declines by roughly 16% per decade, causing reduced muscle mass and thinning skin thickness. Cortisol levels tend to increase in this inflammatory environment, a shift closely correlated with impaired recovery and hippocampal atrophy in the brain. Simultaneously, the drop in estrogen and testosterone accelerates bone loss and diminishes protein synthesis. The macroscopic result of these microscopic damage loops is the visible phenotype of aging: frailty, cognitive decline, and reduced bone density. If the biological hardware is inevitably degrading, how do aging individuals manage to maintain independence and high life satisfaction? The answer lies in psychosocial adaptation, a necessary behavioral response to dwindling metabolic and temporal resources. This section, showing the SOC framework, diagrams the primary behavioral algorithm utilized by successful agers. To maintain function, individuals execute 3 steps. They select specific high-priority goals, they optimize their existing capabilities to achieve those targets, and they compensate for biological deficits using external tools or new strategies. Looking at the socio-emotional selectivity diorama, we see that psychological goals undergo a deliberate recalibration. As the perception of remaining time narrows, motivation shifts. The drive for long-term knowledge seeking is reallocated toward present-oriented emotional satisfaction and immediate relationship quality. These psychological shifts are optimized behavioral patches. They are designed to maximize systemic stability when energy and time are at a premium. Psychosocial adaptation is the necessary software update that allows the human system to maintain function even as hardware resources become scarce. Behavioral choices also scale backward, allowing macro-level interventions to act as direct molecular modulators. Looking at the bottom right corner of the chart, we can deconstruct physical exercise to see the specific biochemical pathways through which it counters biological decay. First, targeted physical activity upregulates the body's antioxidant defenses, deploying them to actively neutralize the reactive oxygen species leaking from the mitochondria. Second, kinetic activity physically accelerates the clearance of harmful glycation products out of the system. Finally, the mechanics of exercise act as a systemic flush, reversing chronic IL-6 inflammation. We see a conscious behavioral input, the decision to engage in kinetic movement, bridge the gap to solve a microscopic biological error, driving the systemic inflammation data back down. The Hayflick limit remains a deterministic floor, yet the rate of stochastic damage and the effectiveness of adaptation are both highly responsive to individual intervention. A complete clinical approach to aging relies on combining these targeted biological interventions with rigorous psychosocial frameworks. Successful aging is an actively engineered process. It requires the aggressive deployment of behavioral updates to extract peak performance from a degrading biological system.